Welcome back, everybody, to the Think Education podcast. I'm Chris Hill, joined, as always, by Judith Lammy. Today, we are delighted and honoured to have a special guest. Judith will, as always, provide the formal and proper introductions. But as both Judith and I have said on multiple occasions when we've referred to this special guest, either in podcasts or even individually, she goes by one name. She's that famous. Everybody knows who she is. Everybody's read her work. I'm sure everybody uses her work on a daily basis. Yeah, we are delighted. You can't see her, but she's now covering her face in embarrassment. But that's the price you pay when you are a world leader in international higher education. So, Judith, over to you for the formal and polished introduction, please. Yeah, no, she's still covering her face.
She's still covering her face, but it doesn't make any difference because it's a podcast. Janet. Yes, you guessed it, guys. It's Janet. We've got Janet Ilieva joining us, and we are so delighted, as you will all know who listen to this. You know, we refer to Janet many times when we're talking about things within our podcast. Everybody knows Janet. Wherever you go, there's Janet. I turn up at airports. There's Janet. We go overseas. We've been on events together, but we know, and one of the loveliest and most modest people you are ever likely to meet. We're delighted that Janet Ilieva has joined us today. As all of you will know, Janet's the founder and director of Education Insight. But not to go through all of Janet's history, but Janet, of course, started her career.
That would be the whole podcast.
That would be the whole podcast. A much more interesting one than the ones we usually do, to be fair, but there you go. But Janet started her career as a university lecturer in economics, which probably explains a few things, before joining the British Council in 2004 to lead their department's work for higher education research and market intelligence. Janet then joined HEFCE in May 2013 as the head of HEFCE's observatory, and there she published on international student demand for higher education in England, with a strong focus on transnational education. Of course, now Janet is known much more widely, not only for her work within transnational education, but for her work particularly using and being informed by current data, very well. And so we're delighted that Janet has joined us today, and I'm just going to get the ball rolling, Janet. As you will know, having listened to Chris and I's ramblings in our podcast, sometimes they start with a question and then they go off on a wild tangent. Neither of us remember what the original question was. But I'm interested to know, though, Janet, in particular, what you are working on at present, because obviously, as I say, there's a lot of things going on. I know that I've been overseas with you at events when we've been working in different countries with different people, particularly developing now their TNE strategies. But what are the kind of things that you are working on currently, or that you think are really current things in the forefront of our minds in the international higher education world?
Good morning, Judith, and good morning, Chris. It's a delight and honor to be on your podcast. Thank you so much for inviting me. We live at our time sounds like a Chinese curse. There is too much happening. It's heavily politicized. It's very uncertain, and it's slightly worrisome about things are heading. And I guess the kind of the dominant word for the moment seems to be there is too much geoeconomics, geopolitics, geotensions. Wherever we look at, there are kind of conflicts and clashes, and people not being nice friends, or nations not being nice friends. So there is quite a lot of escalation, uncertainty, too many changes happening very, very rapidly. And this is worrying me to a degree, because higher education actually is a very conservative sector. it doesn't change very often. It changes at a very slow pace. And being able to respond to seismic shifts, and this is not just the financial environment we are in, it's the geopolitical context, it's the cultural pressures, but also changes that require a proper assessment of core values and core issues, and I really feel for colleagues in the States that have to revisit their EDI policies and their admission processes. And it goes back to the real remit, to the core foundation of universities. So I find it very unsettling. The way that it might, so obviously universities are doing all they can to cushion, to protect their students that they have ultimate responsibility for. But I guess this is kind of framing a much more significant shift in the global landscape. We have been talking in the past 10 years for multipolarity when there is no dominant country. There are many dominant players, or players becoming much more important. And as somebody who loves to observe higher education trends and international mobility flows, we can measure that quite accurately. And this is manifested, or it can be measured by looking at the proportion of the globally mobile population that goes to the Big Four or to the main English-speaking destination countries. And while the global mobility is over 7 million at the moment, the share of the Big Four, or even if we lump together Western Europe and North America together and Australia, their share has been in decline. And we have quite a quantitative, accurate way to measure, I believe, multipolarity in international higher education. What seems to be happening, and here I'm reflecting not on my own thoughts, but on other people's thinking that have had the time to reflect on it for a bit longer, is perhaps what the USA is doing is trying to reinstate this bipolar world where there is us and them. But what is actually, I feel, leading to is lack of trust, or lack of certainty, and loss of values, or loss of faith of what democracy is really all about. And who are the powerful players? And I suspect that this process is actually accelerating multipolarity in higher education. And whereas some higher education experts have been saying, but hold on, this is probably good for the UK because now we have more applications coming to the UK. But I suspect this is probably just a blip. It's temporary. The bigger trend that is kind of underpinning everything that's going on is acceleration of multipolarity, but possibly the demise of the West as where international students used to be the go-to place. So I suspect the appeal or the attractiveness of the main English study destinations is probably in an accelerated decline, if we can say so. Developments or restrictions to international mobility flows in Canada and also in Australia are part of that picture. But as we've seen with the UK's immigration white paper, the UK has now joined the club. So I suspect what we are seeing there is, yes, quite an accelerated multipolarity, but not driven by natural cause. Is very much driven by the countries that used to be the net beneficiaries of global talent.
And by the political landscape within those countries. This isn't something that's driven by any educational motivation, isn't it? It's something that is purely driven through a political objective. As you say, it could be in the UK. Obviously, we, Janet, are sitting in the UK at the moment, you know, we in many ways could use this as an opportunity to benefit from the current situation, couldn't we, in other major receiving countries like Australia, like Canada, and like US, and then we do what we've done yet again. And as you say, we just had the white paper published, whereas, you know, not some massive differences in it, but again, just things that it's chipping away, isn't it? And maybe starting to erode some of that trust for students, for partners. Yeah. But it is then interesting, Janet, that you say that, you know, global mobility is still increasing in many ways, but clearly because students want to go somewhere, don't they? Very often, for a variety of reasons, they don't want to study on their doorstep. Sometimes they do, and we maybe can come to that in a little while, but other times they do actually want to go somewhere. They want the whole experience, don't they, of studying somewhere different and all the learnings that come from that as well. So if they aren't going to these, you know, big English speaking primarily as their first language destinations, where are they going?
It's yes, you're absolutely right, Judith. It's geopolitics driving a lot of these developments, and yes, students are heading towards a destination country that's much nearer to their home, and kind of the rising stars of international education that we're seeing. I mean, crisis in Dubai is perhaps the hotspot of so many things that are happening. The UAE is now one of the top countries that hosts globally mobile students, with probably over 230,000, probably more. The last time I looked at the data was 6 months ago, and there were about 230,000 international students studying in the United Arab Emirates. Malaysia is a prominent host country, but so is Turkey. Turkey has had some of the most significant increases in their international student population. China is rising as another go-to country, and so is Japan and South Korea, Hong Kong and Singapore. So we're seeing all these rising stars with many of their international programs, many of their higher education programs actually been taught in the English language. That are highly attractive to students from within the region, but also beyond the immediate region. And it is a fascinating development, because all these countries that I've actually mentioned are very good in transnational education. And transnational education is actually been a significant driver of change in the higher education space. First, if we kind of go back, and Chris and Judith, I've learned so much from you in that space over the past 2 decades. It starts usually as on the back of Private Higher Education Act, that then opens up the higher education space for international players. And Chris, you've observed that well in Malaysia, and on the back of the East Asia currency crisis, when private education legislations were passed, then the HE systems were opened for either private players, international players, to deliver higher education. Many of those were invited in the respective country, just like the example of the classical example with the University of Nottingham in Malaysia. But also many other universities are being invited by the respective governments to engage or to provide higher education. So I believe there is no surprise that those countries have become significant players in that space. And what TNE has massively contributed to is internationalization of the local higher education landscape. So co-development of higher education curricula, provision in different languages, widening access to higher education to students that were typically excluded from the local HE system, either because it's too elitist or for different reasons. So this, I guess, what humbles me, and I'm quite. It brings this warm feeling when you observe it, is how the mission of the institution engaged in TNE can kind of perpetuate. The same is observed overseas, and the widening access agenda. Those that are doing it well, the widening access is really there. It's quite critical in terms of accepting students that are atypical. They may be from a different age profile, different gender imbalances in certain countries, for example, different ethnicity, caring responsibilities, working people, in the wider possible spectrum. It's a slightly different along the response that you probably expected, Judith, but it is an evolving landscape and it changes.
Great. Chris, you wanted to come in?
No, we do love evolving, don't we? Evolving and evolution.
We do. It's our word.
Yeah. I think what's I mean, everything you just said, Jan, is very interesting. And but just the last point that you brought up in terms of the widening access, I mean, this is something that Judith and I have sort of, I don't know, spent a lot of time thinking about, if not necessarily getting anywhere other than thinking about it more. This nature of, how an institution takes its value base when it moves, and how when interacting with a completely different community and often under a completely different set of legal and regulatory frameworks, how it bridges that gap of maintaining the core identity and quality, but at the same time ensuring that it is at least connected and adapted to the new context. I mean, when I started in Malaysia in 2008, it was very much about it needed to be the same. It needed to be exactly the same. That was where perception of quality was. If it didn't look and sound and feel the same, it didn't count. And even in the 8-9 years that I was there, that philosophy changed, and then it became a case of, well, as you say, how do we adapt co-curricular? How do we send that information back to the core? How does that change the nature of who we are? And I'm wondering, this is probably far too stupid of a question to actually even ask, but given your initial conversation about the multipolarity, do you think we're going to see we are seeing evidence of sort of joint activity and joint campuses and joint programs? Do you think we're going to see more of that? And is that going to, again, change the nature of our value system within higher education? So it's kind of a simple question, really doesn't require more than 30 seconds to answer.
I think, Chris, it's a very multi-layered question, and it kind of it depends how many layers you want to unpick, because yes, in 2008 or 15, 25 years ago, many of the legislations, and I think it's a constant battle between the quality of education provision and meeting the local need and adapting the content. And it has led to quite a lot in the academic literature. The whole narrative around westernization of local curricula. But actually, for many, it's a regulatory requirement that a course that is not taught domestically for 5 years cannot be taught overseas. And this is the drive to quality, where basically it's really difficult to deliver a new course. And I believe that was critical in Malaysia, where many of those tensions surfaced probably more than 10 years ago. How do we adapt the course that it meets local demand, local needs, and yet there is an evidence of sufficient quality of the two institutions coming together to deliver it? And I believe this is still a regulatory requirement across most of the higher TNE bills that I have come across, which makes it very difficult to contextualize, to adapt the academic content locally. And it is a conversation with local policymakers and local stakeholders on how do we adapt the TNE course so that it meets local needs, local demand, especially in countries where the reality may be very different. I think in Malaysia it has to do with finance and Islamic finance. compared to the UK universities not having that course, and it's difficult to develop a track record of a course that there is no need for in the domestic context. So this continues, I think, to play significant pressures on the TNE offering. However, the positive development, kind of unpicking the second layer of your question about the jointness of these education ventures, I think what we've seen in the past was very much on the autonomous TNE delivery. And this has almost disappeared. Most of the TNE we are seeing is joint, it's collaborative, ensuring more than two partners are joining forces together. And it's not just joining forces to mitigate risk, reduce risk, it's joining forces to combine knowledge and know-how and for their best art. And a fantastic example of that, I believe, is Deacon Lancaster and Navitas in Indonesia, where we're seeing several partners coming together to deliver education. But I suspect, and that will be quite interesting to observe, India, where there is a gold rush to TNE happening at the moment, whether, although a lot of the TNE happening is joint venture with an investor, whether we're likely to see more joint ventures between international universities, local IITs or local universities, and local businesses whose needs this education provision is likely to meet, and whether we're likely to see higher education hubs or something in the style of what we used to call science parks, where local companies with local universities and international universities are creating an ecosystem where higher education, research, and engagement with the local industry is taking place. I believe this jointness in your question, Chris, I think we're likely to see much more of that happening to the extent that, to my knowledge, perhaps the last autonomous TNE shaped as International Branch Campus, I mean, it's not the largest form of TNE, but it's the one that we talk most about because it's the most visible, it's tangible. There is a building there. It was probably the University of Birmingham in Dubai. I suspect most of the International Branch campuses that followed after that are all joint ventures. And I suspect this joint element is likely to be kind of the new development or the new evolution of the branch campus, with not just several partners coming together, but several institutions as well.
Is that also, though, Janet, partly pragmatic in that, you know, if you're an institution, for example, in the UK, particularly given the financial challenges that we all know, I mean, it's been all over the press. That doesn't necessarily mean it's accurate, of course. However, it has been reported in areas where we do actually know that it's accurate. So we know that there's a lot of challenge when it comes to, you know, financial situations for universities. So also pragmatically, they simply don't have the money to invest in setting up a building somewhere. And also that takes a lot of time, doesn't it? So I suppose, you know, you bring to the table what you can bring to the table more readily, don't you? And if you can bring to the table, you know, your knowledge and expertise and your academic knowledge within a certain area, you can say, well, that's what I can bring. What can you bring over the other side of the world? But I suppose also then, so there's that side of it, but also it sounds to me that if ever undergraduate recruitment or recruitment was only the sole or primary driver for engagement, which is probably a question mark anyway, but it would seem that it certainly isn't now. As you were saying, you know, maybe there are other models that are forming that are not only with property investors to help you just physically set up a campus, but there are then people coming in delivering the, you know, professional service areas there, but that strong connection into business and industry, maybe to provide a more solid and predictable and sustainable employability stream for your students, but also to develop research and innovation for whatever campus might be there, seems to be something that is increasing as well.
Absolutely. It's very difficult when you build a university to kind of constrain it over what it does. The teaching and the research function, community engagement, connections with the industry are kind of core strands, they're core activities. And it's difficult to put a lead on those activities. It just happen. The moment there is a higher education institution there, it's part of the ecosystem in which it thrives. So I believe it's these other threads that actually drive this development, but also perhaps some of the key reason why many of the newer wave of international branch campuses, those that are coming into India, for example, are likely to have the research function, the community engagement function, the industry much more prominent, because it's a country with thousands of institutions. And it's a very dynamic higher education landscape. For an international branch campus with a local investor to recoup their investment, and for the higher quality of higher education provision that many highly ranked institutions are aiming to engage in, I suspect the tuition fees would be reflective of these levels of investment. If high tuition fees don't generate the income levels that the graduates will be earning, that will be a significant undermining of those brands that have gone to India. So it's very strong community engagement and industry linkage.
But the challenge with that is one of them is that, having just had then a conversation about universities and TNE widening access and enabling people that wouldn't be able to do, then particularly now that we're looking at ensuring that there's a research base there, that there's an innovation connection, that are we in danger of then those institutions almost becoming uber elitist? So is it they're not going to be helping widen access because they're going to be setting certainly the financial bar too high for those students that maybe could do with that, want that education within that area?
So, I mean, yes, we went into the area of international branch campus. International branch campuses account possibly between 7 and 9% of the TNE students. There are much wider variations of transnational education in the space of joint degrees, double degrees, where brick and mortar is not required, but we are talking about supporting local universities to internationalize their culture.
And that's where the widening access can engage more.
And this is where the widening access, but also a lot of the online provision occupies a space where typically caters to the needs of people that may have caring responsibilities, or they may be already in full-time employment, but also the whole non-degree spectrum, which is typically focused on qualifications and continuous professional development and micro-credentials, is a whole wide spectrum of professional training and upskilling that doesn't necessarily lead to degree, but it supports people to either upskill their levels of education or qualification, or prepare them for sidewise career move. So it's a very wide spectrum. I suspect the branch campus as an investment, as an operation, it really depends on how it's structured. The high tuition fees doesn't mean that the institution doesn't have scholarship programs, or there will be internships and other areas that may be given to a particular industry in the respective locality. And if there is an industry partner whose needs the university, for example, is catering to or aiming to cater to, there is a huge scope to do more tailored education provision in that particular area. And in that space, India is a very opportune country. Unlike China, and I guess where China was when the branch campuses were encouraged 20 years ago, India is very much services-driven economy. So many of the services sectors are driving the economic growth in the country. It's not manufacturing, though there is manufacturing that is quite rapidly evolving as well, but it still is predominantly services-based economy.
Yeah, so it's got a very different feel to it, hasn't it, from that point of view? A slightly different question, but I think it complements it quite well. I mean, I know I've heard you talk at various conferences in the past, Janet, about universities' international strategies, and how they've developed over the years. And I suppose trying to bring then that together with TNE. It's probably safe to say, isn't it, that transnational education strategies, if indeed people even had a strategy for them, have either sat on the periphery of an international strategy, if indeed people have had international strategies, or they've sat separately, or they've just been a series of random activities that people have engaged in. Do you think this is a time in particular where universities, wherever they are, if they do want to engage with TNE in I suppose, a more focused way, or just do more of it, are you seeing a shift in universities in terms of how they engage with transnational education? Are they becoming more strategic? Are they embedding it within, well, actually probably not even just universities, let's face it, there are countries as well. UK's got its international education strategy. Arguably, it would have been nice in the last one to have TNE mentioned in that. But thinking back to universities, do you think that there's a need there, or a direction of travel there, where it will become more fully embedded in their international strategies?
Well, this is certainly the direction of travel. I mean, if we go back 30 years ago, excuse me, international higher education was kind of a niche, a peripheral niche to universities' core activities. And the TNE was niche, part of a niche. It was very, very kind of tiny element, if the university was doing it at all. What we've seen over the decades is that international higher education has become a center core activity for many of the universities. It has become much more prominent. And within that, TNE has become, started to play a much more prominent role as such. And we still have some of the, I mean, this may be quite a new area for some universities, but the Open University, the University of London, is something that they've kind of evolved to start with. It has been a core activity for the past 100 years or so. So it's kind of it's varied, but overall at the sector level, I think being niche within a niche, it has become a much more center core activity for many of the institutions. But this is at the institutional level, and I do see it becoming much more a prominent activity or an integral part of the international higher education, because it's just a new form of mobility. Most of the international students that universities get, this is a student mobility. A lot of the TNE is the program mobility. In the less within the international branch campus case, this is a mobility of institutions. So it's a mobility in different shapes that is taking place. And as such, it is a core activity of what the universities do. But it's interesting, you also mentioned national level education policies. So many of, for example, the UK, Australia, most of the European countries as well have a national level international education strategy. What I'm seeing more of is conversations, for example, with the Ministry of Education and Training in Vietnam, but also the Commission for Higher Education in the Philippines, where TNE is becoming a part of the country's internationalization education strategy, international higher education strategy, where TNE drives the internationalization. I know that the Commission for Higher Education in the Philippines is working on a national transnational education strategy. In the country, there are many conversations that are happening, consultation with the higher education institutions on the shape, the strands of work, and what it would actually do. But the government is seeing TNE as means to rebalance international student mobility out of the country. Vietnam has historically been the third largest sender of international students up to last year, when UNESCO data picked up Uzbekistan as the third largest sender of international students. But TNE is something that MOET, for example, Ministry of Education and Training, sees as a way to rebalance mobility flows and bring international students in the country, so that student mobility becomes much more balanced, and its inbound and outbound flows are not heavily skewed towards Vietnamese students leaving the country to study abroad. It's increasingly Vietnamese institutions engaged in TNE activities teach in English language, and these programs, as was reported in a study published last year by MOET, are becoming more and more attractive to students from within the Southeast Asia and East Asia region. So it's a way to balance mobility flows. And I suspect we're likely to see more and more TNE strategies kind of playing a critical role in shaping other countries' national strategies for education.
Yeah, absolutely, Janet. I mean, we're coming towards the end now, but on that note, and I suppose sort of taking us back to where we started at the beginning, really, you know, if I think of UK institutions, for example, clearly there are a lot of challenges, as we say, within the sector. We know that with the home fee staying as it has done for the past like 12 or more years, that universities, you know, haven't had a sustainable financial base. So international has become much more prominent. As you say, it's gone from being niche to being sort of core, or at least central, or at least prominent in what people are doing. TNE has moved into that sort of not quite niche space, but becoming more something that institutions are looking at. But when you think of the geopolitical situation, when you think of the challenges that are there, you know, there's a lot of risk and challenge for universities putting on courses in their own country and on their own doorstep. This clearly, though, it's even riskier, isn't it? It's even, you know, there might be high return there. It might enable you to diversify your portfolio, but there's a lot of risk there. So as universities potentially move into this kind of space more, do you think that it increases their risk level more? Do they have to have stronger risk appetite? But also, what might be the things that they can do to try and mitigate some of that risk? Because if you're all of a sudden starting to rely on something, certainly financially, that's starting to become core, that in itself, you know, is inherently risky right from the beginning, then, you know, it might work, but it might not, and you're going from something where you had an even chance of this potentially working out to, well, maybe it's a 20-to-1 chance, and that's quite a risky business, isn't it?
It is a very interesting question. I think that if transnational education is done well, it's a way to de-risk the provision of education, because you're kind of leveraging a risk between the home country of the institution, in the context the UK, or the host country for transnational education provision. perhaps one of the best way to de-risk it is having a good local partner, a trusted partner that can navigate the local regulatory landscape, knows the local context, knows the local students, their families, is well embedded within the local industry infrastructure and the local context. And the best way to do that is due diligence on the local partners through local transnational education partners. But relying, it goes two ways. Trust travels both ways. One has to trust the local partners, and the local partners must trust the respective UK institution. It takes years to build a relationship. Even when we talk about financial returns, it's not something that happens overnight. Yeah. It is a long-term investment, and unlike student recruitment, which is an annual activity, it can be quite transactional in those terms. TNE is a long-term game. One has to be prepared to wait and nurture the partnership. And over time, it will start bringing results, and it will start bringing financial returns, but it will not be immediate. It is for the long term. And I think being prepared that this is a long-term investment and it will not bring the financial returns immediately is a way to not rush it. And this is why I believe the approach to risk is much more moderate. It's well considered, it's well thought of. A much higher risk is associated with rushed activities where not all the preparatory work is done in a timely manner. So my advice is TNE reduces risk if it's done properly, but it has to be done properly. One needs to do all the preparation that it requires, do all the due diligence that is needed, and select carefully the partners one chooses to work with. But once selected, stick with them. And
yes,
it works usually for the better in the long run.
Yeah, very, very wise advice, Janet. I mean, there are sayings associated with rushing into things, aren't there? That what will happen if you do, but I think your last point actually, and we'll round it off now. But your last point also is a really crucial one. If you've got that partnership as well, and you've developed that partnership, and it's a trusted partnership, there will always be things that happen. There will always be challenges, but try and work on them together as well. Solve those challenges. It's much easier to do that with a partner that's trusted somewhere, isn't it, than to walk away with all of the issues that you will have with trying to walk away anyway, which you can't just do that, and quite rightly. But then you have to start something else new, which will take you a long time. So it's worth that persevering from both sides of the relationship, isn't it? Learning about each other as well, and solving the challenges and any problems that you have together too.
Absolutely, and also giving the partnership the strategic importance that it requires to be nurtured. And I also suspect a lot of the TNE activities that I've seen fade over the years is really the lack of effort that was put into the relationship. Or maybe the effort was there, but the significance that it required wasn't there. It wasn't placed as a strategic priority for the institution. And the moment there is a hurdle on the way, the partnership was just let go because it wasn't considered important enough. So with that in mind, it's maybe, I guess, if an institution has 100 partnerships, it's good to consider which one of those, or can they be consolidated in some way? Can the institutional efforts support them equally? How many of them have the strategic importance that they require to be nurtured over the time? And why, I guess the critical question is, why the institution doing it?
Yes.
It's kind of back to where we started, really. But I do
Absolutely,
think
yes.
as especially now we've got a new immigration white paper. International student recruitment to the UK appears to be becoming much harder, much more difficult. It's maybe that many of the institutions, the way that they can maintain their global engagement is nurturing those partnerships with partners overseas, and whether it's research, whether it's mobility, whether it's engagement with local industries. There is much more that can be done in that space globally, irrespective of where the students are, irrespective of where the partners are. Engagement nowadays is global, and there are some hard times when the students may find it much harder to travel because it's too expensive, or because the immigration system may be a bit too prohibitive. But these things, as we've seen in the past, they do change.
Yes, and sometimes you just need patience to know that these things will change, don't you? Things, or maybe a bit of hope as well. Things might get a bit better. Yeah. We've got one very final question for you, Janet, which has got nothing to do with international higher education and everything to do with us being a bit nosy. So we're asking everybody. So you spend a lot of time traveling. I know you do. Sometimes on the train. I've been sitting in lecture theatres, meant to be giving a presentation with Janet, and I've been looking at my phone, and she's like, I'll be with you in 5 minutes. I'm like, we're on the stage in 4 minutes, Janet, run. She's on her way. We've been overseas together. So you do go, you go to many different places. Is there one homesick dish that you really miss when you are not in your beautiful home in the UK? Is there something where you might be, I mean, obviously, you might go to places that you've either come from or, that you've visited a lot in the past anyway. But is there something where when you're sitting in the Philippines helping them develop their TNE strategy, or when you're sitting in an airport waiting to get on your plane coming out of Romania, as we were a little while ago, is there something where you think, oh, I can't wait to get home because I want to have this? What is it, Janet Ilieva? Give us that little glimpse into what you like as a person.
I do have my childhood dish is actually a dish my grandmother used to do. It's a filo pastry pie. It's a multi-layer filo pastry pie. Judith, I think you might have had it when we went to a TNE event organized by British Council in Sofia.
We did.
And this filo pastry pie is my go-to dish, and it just brings all these childhood memories filled with sunshine and lunch in the alfresco lunches in the garden, when my grandmother would just bake the pie and serve it for breakfast. And it's kind of my comfort, a go-to pie. The Bulgarian word is banica. But those that haven't tried it, look it up. Oh,
and what's it got in it? What's the core ingredient around the filo?
It's really, really quick to make. You can just put it together in about, you can prepare it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to prepare. Just the baking takes a bit longer. It's basically feta cheese, eggs and spinach, and that's basically it. Nothing else. It's really very, very basic.
You heard it here first, guys. And if Janet is looking a bit down at any point, get to your kitchen, get some phyllo, get some feta, get some eggs, get some spinach, put it in the oven and give it to Janet. A childhood pie filled with sunshine. There cannot be a better way to end a podcast than that. Thank you very much, Janet Ilieva. We are so grateful for you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Judith. And thank you, Chris. As always, delight to see you both and talk to you. Thank you so much for including me and inviting me to your podcast. It's been a privilege talking to you.